Welcome to the CMO Spotlight, and I'm here with Kevin Thompson. And Kevin is the Chief Marketing Officer for Grace De Monaco, Princess Grace Foundation USA, and Grace Influential. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you. So I wonder if you could just tell us about the three parts of the organization that you represent.
Sure. Yeah, it's an interesting infrastructure to be in. So the Princess Grace Foundation is the foundation that was started shortly after Princess Grace Kelly passed away 40 years ago. It's overseen by His Serene Highness Prince Albert II, who is the boss. It's been a charitable foundation that has been operating, raising funds, and raising millions of dollars and giving that away to emerging talent in theater, film, and dance, with the mission being to carry on her philanthropic legacy. And they've been around for 40 years. 2 years ago, we started down a new path where the Princess Grace Foundation was really, I think, becoming a more public-facing entity. In the past, the organization operated really kind of privately, and unless you were in the world of theater, dance, and film, you probably didn't know what the Princess Grace Foundation was, and that was intentional. And now this shift has happened and that's at the point that I joined the organization to really build out these two new initiatives, one called Grace Influential, that is really about her community and the relevance of her influence and her iconography today, which is enormous and global and bigger than I thought it was when I joined. And Grace De Monaco, which is the first of its kind global luxury brand created exclusively for the benefit of others. So yeah, some pioneering efforts on behalf of the foundation.
And so that's a complex organization when you're talking nonprofit,
Yes.
Luxury goods company, et cetera. So I'm curious, in your role as CMO, what does that mean? What does that entail, and how to balance between the three?
Yeah, it is complex. I mean, it hasn't been done before, which I didn't know when I was joining. This opportunity really caught my eye for a number of reasons. One, because I was really drawn to the fact that, to the mission of the foundation. I was drawn to the idea of creating a new global luxury maison, one that would live, on the same level as the Dior's and the Hermes and the Gucci's of the world. And we certainly have built that. The foundational pieces are there. And I wanted to do that. I wanted it to be purpose-driven. I wanted to know that the efforts in that space were going to make a difference. And so, it's a new business model. And actually there was a wonderful article that was published, I think in the springtime, in Fashion United about, Grace De Monaco really setting an example for a new model for luxury and approaching it a new way. This idea that we are, from inception, we are a luxury brand that was designed to be of benefit to other people, and that just hasn't been done before. Every other luxury brand has sort of backed into philanthropy, as they should, and those are important initiatives. I worked at Gucci when we started working with the UN under Daniela Vitale's leadership there. I've been part of these efforts before, but this is the first time that a brand was created with that intent at the very beginning. Grace Influential is really where her fan base lives. This is her community. This is the relevance of her influence and her iconography that has carried on, from when she was alive, past, and 40 years since she passed, and that remains remarkably influential to this day. It's quite surprising.
So I'm curious about your career journey there, because I know you mentioned your time at Gucci very early in your career, and then I know you did a long stint in the real estate, commercial real estate space on a couple of different stops.
Yeah.
And just tell us about the career arc and how that evolved.
Yeah, I always tell people it's not been a linear path. No. For sure. I think that was kind of by design in hindsight, and I love that. I actually I was going to be a high school teacher. I came to New York City from Vancouver, Canada, to teach high school. I came as part of a Gates Foundation initiative, and I was going to work with the Board of Ed. But I had this idea in the back of my mind that I wanted to try something of my own. I wanted to build something of my own, and I started this little menswear company, and I opened a shop in Soho in New York. And ultimately it didn't work out, which it was heartbreaking at the time, but in hindsight, it led to an opportunity to join Gucci at the time when Tom Ford had just departed, and the business there was kind of reeling to a degree and trying to find a new path after, that cult of personality had departed the brand. And so they were looking for entrepreneurial people to help rebuild some of the business categories. And I joined and was the area manager for the ready-to-wear collections and made to measure and silks for a number of years. Loved my time there. I learned an extraordinary amount. I mentioned Daniela Vitale's name. Who is the CEO of Ferragamo now. I learned probably more professionally from her and from Mark Lee than anyone I've ever worked for. I left there to work at Montclair for a short time to start building out their DOS locations in North America. Then I got asked by Daniela and Mark to join them at Barneys, and they were at Barneys New York, and I went back there. Was honored to go there to help rebuild that extraordinary brand and extraordinary company. It breaks my heart that it is no more. But we had a fabulous run and did some really, the thing about Barneys, the thing that I learned there was that you could work in that space and have it really be about sort of art and creativity and business. And Barneys was really unique in that way, that what Mark Lee used to say all the time was that it was about the edit. It was about the way that we talked about Barneys and the way that we talked about the goods we sold, because everything we sold there was basically sold other places, right? We sold Fendi handbags, but there was a Fendi flagship store just a few blocks down the street. So there was something very special about the way that they did it at Barneys, and that I learned an enormous amount there as well. Then I made the shift, and I was recruited by Simon Property Group to help build out Simon as a consumer-facing brand, and I was overseeing their premium outlets portfolio, and then recruited from there to go to Sotheby's International Realty, where I was chief marketing officer for a very large, 4-century-old brand that was active in 72 countries with 23 or 24,000 agents. An extraordinary undertaking to help mold the vision of this 4-century-old brand into something that was new and appealing to emerging affluent consumers. So and then all of these sort of pieces come together really wonderfully with this opportunity to build something for the foundation. It's, I'm working with one of the most pristine global legacies in existence. Her legacy is kind of untouchable in many ways. In many ways, she was the first global influencer in fashion and fine jewelry, and she was passionate about the arts. She published books of pressed flower designs. She was at her core, I think, an artist. But she was also a princess. She also led, the principality, and is so beloved there. When you go there, the adoration for her is palpable when you're there today, when you're in Monaco today, and she's been gone for 4 decades. And so I got the chance to sort of take that legacy and use the inspiration. The tagline we use for Grace De Monaco a lot is inspired by an icon. It is this very new thing, but we draw heavily on her passions and her purpose and what she believed. She wanted more than anything to leave the world a better place, and I sort of share in that philosophy. So
well, it also sounds to me like you've maybe had a common thread throughout your career, which is leveraging creativity and kind of creative adjacent for marketing. And it's not just about influencing a consumer, or it's about coming up with something special and unique and different that will then lead to something, to commerce happening.
Yeah, I think, the commerce is the sort of, if you do it right, can be like the wonderful after effect of, because I think there is, again, this sort of goes back to the Barneys days and Gucci, of course, because I think I idolized Tom Ford and what he did there and what he built there. And I think there is an art to what he does, and there is an art to what the very best brands do. And I think if that is held sort of, what's the word, sacrosanct, if you will, if that is one of the most important things, then the commerce comes as this wonderful side effect, and it should if you get it right. Yeah. But I also, I love the business of marketing too. I mean, that was something that was paramount when I was at Sotheby's International Realty. It was an enormous business. My last year there, we managed about $140 billion worth of sales volume. It's an enormous business, an enormous amount of commerce happening. Yeah. And so, they can't be divorced from each other. And I've sort of learned through these various places that I've stopped that if you can find the way for them to work together and sort of play off of each other, then you can really build something extraordinary. And I think that's what we're doing with Grace De Monaco.
Love it. So I'm curious if there's a piece of advice that you wish you'd gotten early in your career, or maybe advice you'd give to somebody that's pretty new in their marketing career.
There are a few pieces, I think. I think one of the ones, and this is still something I think about a lot today. Because I love the creativity of it, and I love the business of marketing, and I sort of pursue that rather kind of doggedly, and I can sometimes get blinders on and just want to get the things done that I think need to get done. And, there are a community of people who are working on these things. And, I've worked for big global organizations, and right now, we're still very small in many ways because we're just starting. We're just, we have a roster of retailers that we're going live with around the world over the next 12 months. So we're really entering this extraordinary growth curve right now. But I have to remind myself regularly that I need to take the blinders off and look around and make sure that not only is everyone else sort of coming along for the ride, but they understand why I'm doing what I'm doing, and why I can be quite demanding for certain things, and I want things done a certain way because I think, and again, this probably goes back to the Mark Lee and Daniela Vitale, like the Barneys and Gucci days. You have to pay attention to the details. You have to, and things matter in the marketing space that other people might not consider, or on the business side they might think are less important. And sometimes it just takes a moment to pause and have a conversation about it. And I think that you need to take your time maybe a little bit more than I have. The other piece of advice I think would be to be mindful about aligning with certain egos in the marketplace. And I haven't had this experience for a while, but it happened fairly early on, and it can be hard when you're you're trying really hard and someone else's ego doesn't recognize that. So
yeah. It's fair. So I believe that everybody has a superpower, and I'm curious what either you've been told your superpower is or what you believe your superpower to be.
I think it's funny. I've had people say this before, but I think there is when I need to, I can sort of cut through the noise, and I think that particularly when you're building something new and you're not working with when I was at Sotheby's International Realty, I had I just had, and Simon too, I had an enormous marketing budget, and I got to, you make mistakes, fine, no big deal. You can write a check and move on to the next thing. I think it becomes so much more important when you're doing something, not only starting small, for 2 years, we were very much in the startup phase. We had, we were funded by the foundation's endowment. We had to be very, very careful about every penny that we spent. So I think being able to cut through the noise and not waste time and sort of get to the point of what needs to be done is probably it.
Yeah.
That's a power.
Great. I'm curious where you find, or maybe you find inspiration for your team. Where do you go to find inspiration for either yourself or your team?
Yeah, I think the first place is her and her legacy. So I had a really interesting connection to Princess Grace when I joined, because when I was at Gucci, I was tapped by the CEO from Daniela Vitale at the time to write training manuals for employees, and I trained all the sales associates in North America. I spent 2 years traveling around training them all, and I wrote these stories about the heritage of the brand and actually what went into building this incredible empire that is the House of Gucci. And I learned the story of how she was involved in the creation of the Gucci flora pattern, and most people don't know that story. And I was always kind of amazed by that. I thought, it's such an incredible story that Princess Grace was invited to come in by Aldo Gucci to work with the designers. And it's mentioned in the movie at the House of Gucci, but they don't tell the full story, but the scarf is there. And he says something, I think his line is like, "That's my legacy," when he points at that silk scarf. And so I had this really interesting connection to her. So when the call came and they said, "Oh, would you be interested?" I thought, well, this is a really lovely full circle moment that I'm going to be, that I've been telling stories about her for over a decade, because everywhere I went after that, and I would talk about the importance of storytelling and the importance of that, the impact that can have on brand value and the ability for it to drive business when you do it well is extraordinary. So I'd been telling these stories over and over and over again. And I thought, wow, now this is interesting, because now it's her story and I'm coming to work for her son. And that's pretty cool. And she just is so, what I've learned since joining is just how remarkable an individual she was. And it's amazing to me all the time. I'm consistently in awe of what she did and the impact she had on whole communities. I mean, when she was an actress, she was instrumental in changing the way Hollywood contracts were executed for men and women, because she wanted greater equality for male and female actors. She championed representation and equality 60 years ago, and we're still trying to figure it out today, which is kind of sad in many ways. But she was doing these things, and she had a way, and she spoke about this often. She had a way of doing it. She didn't come in to blow the lid off things and say, "Hey, Monaco, I'm here, everything's going to change." She played by the rules, but she still got what she wanted done. And the Monaco of today wouldn't look or feel like it does if it wasn't for her. And I think that's incredible.
Nice. So I'm curious if there are certain values that you either want to demonstrate as a leader, or maybe values that you would demand in somebody that would work on your team.
Yes, I think there are. So what I ask of my team is something I aspire to myself, and it is just the idea that we're going to try as hard as we can. I just want everybody to try as hard as you can. I actually got it tattooed on my arm. You can't really see it, but it says the only real failure is the failure to try. And I think that's the thing that matters the most to me. If we've tried as hard as we could, and we've been as thoughtful as we could, and we've done things to the best of our ability, then that's really the best you can do. And that's all I ask.
Well, you can tell it's a core value if you actually tattoo it on your body. That tells you it's truly a core value.
Yeah.
So I set up here at Setup, we're connectors between brands and agencies. That's often what we do. It's a little bit more than that, but we live in a space we're not an agency and we're not on the client side, but we live in that space in between. I'm curious just generally how you work with marketing agencies, either today at the current gig or even in a past life.
Curious about how we work with agencies.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we work with a lot of different agencies. We work with, it's interesting. I think when I was at Sotheby's, my goal was to bring a lot of the work in-house, because they had, and I think that this is changing. Historically, the way that I saw it was there were a lot of agencies out there that there wasn't a great deal of transparency. So I think you could, there were big fees and you would write big checks, and then it was difficult to see what was actually being done, and then even more difficult to understand the ROI, and part of that, the digital just changed that. They changed everything, because you can track behavior, you can watch consumers, you can look at things real time. I mean, second to second, you can gauge interactions and all of those things. It used to be that you'd write a big check to run a page in Vogue and hope that you would sell the handbag that was featured. And if you did, it might have been because of the page in Vogue, and it might have been because of something else. Right. And if it didn't sell, was it because you got the ad wrong or the vibe? So I think there were a lot of questions that were difficult to answer, whether you're doing it internally or partnering with an agency. I think, so my approach was to try to bring as much of that work in-house whenever possible. I think that has changed lately. And I think, we've been very thoughtful about the marketing agencies that we've partnered with particularly in the digital space. We've done a lot of testing and learning over the last 12 months. We worked with, an influencer focused agency, because I'm always on the fence about influencers. I think, does it work? It can also be, you can also spend a lot of money and not get any return for it. But I think there's so much more transparency now that I feel like I'm more open to engaging with the external agencies, because it's hard to cover things up. And I'm not trying to say, I think maybe I was a little suspicious just because I do love the business side of it. So I wanted to know what was happening, like how the wheels were turning, and you didn't always have access to that. And now you kind of have to, they have to report back. You have to be able to, there needs to be a dashboard that we can go in and we can look at together and understand, we're working on paid social here, and here's the impact, and here's what's happening, and here's the reach and the spend and all of these things, and your ranking. So I think, it's a long way to get around to your question, but I think, my approach to agencies has shifted. And I think more transparency is just always better. It's always better, because marketers, I think, have come under more and more and more scrutiny. It used to be, everybody knew they had to market, but I think from a finance standpoint, people were like, oh, marketing just gets all this money and they play around with it and throw parties, and but the business, but somehow the business is being driven from somewhere else. I don't know. It takes a village,
but not the credit, maybe.
Yeah. And so I like this new era of marketing. I like that we are more closely tied to driving revenue. I think I always wanted that, because I wanted to know that my efforts were working. So
I'm curious then, are there certain disciplines or functions of marketing that you feel you really want to keep in-house and that you really don't want to outsource because they're core to your business? And are there certain other functions where you feel I really could benefit from the external perspective and outsourcing that to an agency?
I think the true brand creative, the art of the brand, particularly when it's new, and we've run into this with Grace De Monaco, it's hard to outsource that. Because I think I know what I want Grace De Monaco to sound like. And when I say sound, I'm talking like look and feel, like all of it. Like I have a clear sense of how I want Grace De Monaco to resonate. And that's hard to teach. I think there are people who get it, who get luxury. And so they come in and they're like, oh, I see. Like you're selling a $560 bottle of parfum at Neiman Marcus. It needs to sound a certain way. It needs to look a certain, there's a means of execution that needs to accompany that for consumers to take you seriously. And that I have found over and over again is a difficult thing to teach. I can teach you the story of the brand. I can teach you about Grace. I can teach you about how fragrance is made. I can teach you all of those things. But I think if you don't get it at that level, and I'm not trying to be sort of snobby about it, we sell $560 bottles of perfume. That lives in a certain, at a certain level in the marketplace. Like our entry point eau de parfum is $220. That's a very expensive perfume for most people. Most people will never buy a $220 bottle of perfume. So, I kind of think Mark Lee used to say this about Barneys. He used to say, everyone can come into a Barneys New York store, but a Barneys New York store is not designed for everyone, right? Everyone should feel welcome. And this is something Barneys struggled with back in the heyday of that sort of snob appeal of luxury. Everyone was welcome, no matter what. You push the door, you walk into the store, you go online, and you can shop Barneys New York. But what those stores contained was not selected for everyone.
I have a friend that had a luxury handbag business, and she used to say that there were sort of two types of customers. There was the type of customer who were aspirationally, this was going to be the one coveted handbag that would be the most important thing in her life, perhaps in terms of possessions. And then there were others that had 20 of those and collected them. And at the end of the day, the one person that cared so much about that single handbag maybe would then trade up and level up over time, but they weren't going to buy 20 of them. And I think, to your point with luxury, it is in reach for some people and aspirational for others? And how do you solve for both audiences, those that are aspirational and those that are,
Yeah. And we have that conversation all the time. So we have this, we're speaking to an aspirational and emerging affluent consumer, and we're speaking to an established luxury consumer, one that knows luxury, doesn't think twice about $560 on a bottle of parfum, and that's the space they live in. And so there are things we create specifically for them, and there are things that we create for that aspirational luxury consumer. It is important to us to connect to that emerging consumer, maybe even more so than some legacy luxury brands, because that was part of what she did. So her philanthropic passion was supporting emerging talent in theater, film, and dance, people at the start of their career.
Yeah.
The grants that we offer, the grants that we fund through the Princess Grace Foundation Awards program, help people start their careers. And this got really driven home to me this time last year when I met the 2021 Princess Grace Foundation Award winners at a small event we had in New York. And I heard people say, this money is going to change my life. Like I was ready to call it a day. I was ready to give up on this dream because, COVID on top of being an aspiring artist was just the death knell for so many in their trade. And they all of a sudden they got a chance to really focus on their art. And that's what this money allows them to do. And these grants are not huge, but they change people's lives. And so I think that needs to be part of Grace De Monaco as well. We need to, I don't ever want to let that go and just say, okay, we're only going to sell $5,000 handbags. We're not going to be that brand. That space is occupied, and I'm fine with that. What we're doing is something that is kind of a hybrid in a way, and I think quite unique.
Mm-hmm. So one more marketing related question, and then I've got some just for fun to wrap things up. I'm curious if there's a campaign or program, either at the current gig or one of your previous gigs, that taught you a valuable lesson that you needed to learn, either because it was a miserable failure and you learned something that you will then apply and figure out how to not do that again, or maybe it was a huge success and you'd like to figure out a way to duplicate that again in the future.
Yeah. So I'll give one example of each. I'll be quick. Okay. So the first one that where I really saw something very important and meaningful being done via a marketing campaign was when I was at Barneys, New York, and we did, I forget the year, but we did an entire season's campaign from the brand perspective using transgender models. And the images were they were black and white images. They were stunning. I have some framed and hanging in my house, and they were sent out as almost like a portfolio rather than a magazine or like a lookbook. And on the backs of each of the images, the models were asked to tell their story of transitioning or something that was sort of relevant and meaningful. And we went out to the stores and we trained sales associates because we wanted them to think about language they were using and how to approach people and have it be this very open and inclusive and welcoming environment. And it was not easy. And it's not that I mean, because this was also what year? I mean, this would be like 2015. So, this was at the very early of the modern conversation that's having around transgender rights and equality, I think was very early on. And but this part of the conversation. And I saw people struggle, and I saw people thinking about, assumptions they had made and biases they had and all of those things. And I thought, well, this is amazing. I mean, this went back to like my teacher roots, because I thought through this marketing campaign that on the surface might seem quite superficial, just in passing, if you didn't bother to read the stories on the backs of the images, that was going to make a real difference in people's lives. And I thought that was incredibly meaningful. So I've carried that forward. And I saw how passionate our CEO, how Mark Lee really cared about that at the time. And I thought, this is very, very cool. And this is something that I want to do more of. I think on the flip side, when it was one of the campaigns when I was at Sotheby's International Realty, and we had launched, this idea of living the brand and like all of that made sense to me. I sort of brought this idea of brand as lifestyle, and Sotheby's, and people who are buying Sotheby's homes really aspire to live a Sotheby's lifestyle in a way that they don't with other real estate brands. And we did a campaign that was kind of rooted in fashion. And there were some short videos that we did for a huge global networking event in Vancouver. They were fabulous videos. They were really gorgeous. And we opened the event with them, and they were kind of jaw-droppingly luxe. But I felt a lot of people kind of scratching their heads and being like, really? We're real estate agents. And, and it's not that they didn't like them or think that they were beautiful. They had trouble connecting how to use them effectively in the work that they were doing. And again,
this is going to help me sell this expensive home. No.
But no, on the surface. But if you really think about it, if you really think about the fact that people aspire to live in a Sotheby's home like no other real estate brand. Nobody cares if you live in a Century 21 home or a Keller Williams home. No, I'm not being shady about those brands at all, but the people don't care about that.
There's no brand around the company to help you sell.
They care about living in a Sotheby's home, and they will tell people, and we did focus groups. I heard people say this. They aspire to own a Sotheby's home because it means I've achieved sort of next level. Next level was the campaign, actually. And I think maybe I jumped the gun. I think maybe it was a little bit too fast because I was trying to wrap my arms around 23,000 agents and take them on this journey of transition with me. And I probably moved a little too quickly.
What percentage of the 23,000 agents do you think were on board from the start? Maybe a small percentage.
Yeah, maybe 20.
Okay, fair.
Which, I wasn't shy about that. I knew I was asked to come in and make changes, and I'm up for that. I love challenging people's perception of things, and I love all of that. Again, I think that's the teacher in me, but it needed more context.
Yeah, totally fair. All right, so a couple questions just for fun. Is there a book or a quote or a movie or a band or a sports team that inspires you, and what is it about that thing that inspires you most?
Well, so my favorite musical artist is Tina Turner, and has been for like a really, really long time. And I think of course, it's this idea of challenging adversity and coming up through horrendous circumstances, and all the while creating incredible things and doing it in what she did. No one else has done. Nobody has done it that way. Nobody, like, I think there are lots of other people who you can say, oh, she's very similar to this, or that artist, he's very similar to that artist. There just isn't anyone like that. And I think it's something amazing that, she got knocked down so many times and came from, this enormously challenging place. And was just unceasingly remarkable about what she did all the time. So I think there's a lot of inspiration there. You can see there's a photo of her over on the wall way over there.
Oh, nice. Kevin, I don't remember my mother going to concerts. She was very into music, but I don't remember her going to concerts. I very vividly remember her going to the Private Dancer tour.
Oh, wow.
Tina Turner, just crystal clear in my mind. That's the one concert that I remember her.
Wow.
It was a big deal for her to go, and it was a big deal, so that's cool.
But I get it. I think what she did for so many women in particular was so meaningful that she finally said, I've had enough, and I am like physically fighting back. I mean, everybody sort of knows the story generally. But for her to say, I sort of did this. I did what I thought I had to do, and I'm really done with it. And now I'm going to go do what I want to do. And she was, and when I've learned so much about how she approaches what she does, and she's in it at every level. And I love that she's not sort of this creative person sitting back saying, make this, make it look like this, go do this, go do that. And I think that there's something really admirable about how her approach was. She worked hard. Even when she was mega famous, she was still working really hard, which I think is, we should all aspire to have that kind of drive.
So I'm curious if there's what brand that you've never worked on, but that you've always admired it and why.
Oh, well, so my team would say they know exactly what I'm going to say. So it would be Tom Ford. I think, it's just really, really quickly, when I first came to New York and I was a high school teacher and I had no money and the Board of Ed didn't pay me for like the first 6 months that I was there. And I was penniless. And it was fall, and I went into the Gucci store on 54th Street, the Tom Ford store. And every year he still does them. He did them at YSL. He still does them to this day. He does these big shearlings, these big coats, big men's shearling coats. And I would try one on and I would just stand there and think, God, this feels good. This feels really
someday.
Yeah, I was like, there's something about this. And I had not even the slightest clue that I would end up working for the company one day. But I think what he does in fashion is art. And, when his pieces would come in, like pieces from his past collections would come in for repairs, I would go down to the tailor studio and just to see it, just to look at, because they were incredible. They were incredible. And there was, their fashion was like sculpture and art for him. And even his latest show blew my socks off. I think it was the most remarkable of any of the shows this past season, because he just has this unceasing desire to be luxurious and make you feel sexy and over the top. And I love it. I love it.
Well, so before I ask you the last question, tell me about the moment when you could finally afford to purchase that shearling jacket or something similar.
I don't know if I'm there yet.
You're not there yet? Oh, well.
No, you know what? No, I'll tell you. I will tell you the moment when I started working at Gucci, because he had just departed and Frida Giannini had just taken over from the group of designers that were there for a few seasons. And we were cleaning out a storage space in the corporate tower in New York. And there was a lot of men's ready to wear. And way at the back of this room of hundreds of suits, I found a Tom Ford buffalo skin leather biker jacket. And I put it on, and it fit me like a glove. It's in my closet right now. I have it to this day. That was 2006. Is that right? Yeah, 2006 or so. And that was it. That was the moment. So I was like, I did it.
I have a piece of art like that I coveted a long time ago, and I finally bought it, and it made a big impact on me. It's after my family and our pets. That's the first thing I would grab from my house if it were burning. It's like that jacket would be probably one of the first things you would grab.
I just put it on to run out of the house. That's what I would do.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So last question, just for fun. Is there a fictional story or a realm in which you would like to live? I've started. So when I was in school, early in high school, I read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, and I was just blown away. And then when Peter Jackson did the movies, what I loved so much about them was that what he did was what I thought it looked like in my head. And I don't think that happens very often. Like when I was reading the books and then I saw it on the screen, I was like, oh, that's what I thought this all looked like. And I was blown away by that. So I really am loving the The Lord of the Rings story. That's like the early story that's being told now, and sort of how they're telling that story. So I would like to visit, maybe before the evil takes over. Right. Well, you must be pretty excited about the Amazon series, and that's sort of the continuation of the whole thing, right?
Yeah, that's what I think I'm 3 episodes in, and I think they're doing a phenomenal job. So that's where I would go. Fictionally, I think a place that really existed, I would go back to sort of Victorian era, just to see. Because I think especially New York, I think just to see the work that went into making things, we just don't do it that way anymore. And, of course, everybody has this romanticized vision of that. It was, the city was filthy, but to see like the work, the handwork, and I guess that it sort of ties to what I was saying about the work that like the Tom Ford pieces that would come back in, to see the craftsmanship that went into these things. We don't build anything the way that they built it then. Extraordinary detail. And it was all done by hand, and it was done with, tools that, we wouldn't even think to use today, because we have things that do things faster and easier, and you don't even have to be in the room. You can just 3D print filigree on things. So
that's well, I have to say, Kevin, this was an amazing conversation.
thank you.
For those of you who don't know, Kevin Thompson is the Chief Marketing Officer of Grace De Monaco, Princess Grace Foundation, and Grace Influential. Thank you so much, Kevin. This has been such
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thanks so much.